Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our Greek mythology. We are on lesson 10. The story is called Atalanta and the Golden Apples. Today, your goal will be to analyze the characters' reactions to events in the myth, Atalanta and the Golden Apples. Students, listen carefully to find what role the golden apples play in the myth and what the characters in the myth do with them. Long ago, in a peaceful little corner of Greece, there lived a king and queen who loved each other very much. Although their kingdom was not large or wealthy, they and all their people lived happily. This king and queen had a daughter, a princess, who was intelligent, beautiful, and a skilled, which means gifted, and able huntress. She also happened to be the fastest runner in the world. Her name was Atalanta. When she reached a certain age, Atalanta's parents told her, "One day you will become queen, and ruling this land is too big a job for one person to do alone. It is time for you to marry." Think. Why do you think Atalanta's parents want her to get married? Think. To their surprise, Atalanta replied, "I can ask wise men or women to help me run the country. As for a husband, perhaps I shall have one someday, but for now, there is no one whom I wish to marry." Now, just so you know, during the time in which this story takes place, much unlike today, it was very uncommon or rare for an adult to choose not to get married. Because of this, Atalanta's parents were very surprised by her statement that she didn't want to get married. But that decision would not cause the same reaction today. Okay, so back to the story. The queen asked, "What about all those fine young men who come around asking to marry you? Surely there must be one." "They care nothing for me, mother," Atalanta replied. "They only want to marry me in order to become king one day." But the king and queen insisted. Finally, Princess Atalanta said, "Very well, I shall marry the first unmarried man who can defeat me in a foot race." "What?" her parents exclaimed. They tried to talk her out of the idea, but they could not. So at last they agreed to her terms or conditions and sent word throughout the land. Now think, what were Atalanta's terms? Do you think any man will be able to defeat Atalanta, the fastest runner in the world? As you might imagine, many young men came to race against the princess, hoping to marry her. She easily defeated every single one, enjoying herself tremendously. One day, after winning yet another race, she just kept running past the finish line for the sheer delight of it. She did not know that looking down from Mount Olympus that day was the goddess of love, Aphrodite. Now think, why would Aphrodite be looking down from Mount Olympus? Aphrodite, the goddess thought, "She is making a joke of love. I cannot allow this to go on." So, is Aphrodite upset or happy about Atalanta's behavior? What do you think Aphrodite will do? Now, at that same moment, a young man was walking along the same road upon which Atalanta was now running. The young man was a brave adventurer named Hippomenes. He was just returning from a long sea voyage, which is a journey, so he knew nothing of the princess's challenge. As Hippomenes walked along, he glanced ahead and saw the most beautiful young woman he had ever laid eyes on, running his way at an unbelievable speed. It was Atalanta, of course, and as Hippomenes was looking at her, the goddess Aphrodite was looking at him. Turning to her son Eros, Aphrodite said, "Go shoot an invisible arrow of love into Hippomenes' heart so that he will fall in love with Atalanta." So Eros did as he was told, and Hippomenes instantly fell in love with Atalanta as she ran by him. He thought, "I have never seen such joy on a human face. I would not have thought it possible, but I believe that I have fallen in love with her." At once, he began to pray to Aphrodite for help, which is what the goddess had planned all along. Think, why does he choose to pray to Aphrodite out of all the gods and goddesses? She appeared before Hippomenes and told him that he must outrace Atalanta if he wanted to marry her. "But this is impossible, my lady," Hippomenes told Aphrodite. "I am a very fast runner, but I have never seen anyone move as fast as Atalanta does." The goddess presented Hippomenes with 3 apples made of purest gold that shone almost as brightly as the sun. "When Atalanta sees these apples, she will not be able to resist picking them up," Aphrodite said. Would you be able to resist or stop yourself from picking up golden apples such as these? Here is what you must do. The next day, Hippomenes challenged Atalanta to a race. Inside his rather loose-fitting clothing, he had hidden the 3 golden apples. Before the race, he told Atalanta, "Your Highness, I want you to know what Your Highness, I want you to know why I am racing against you." Atalanta answered, "In order to marry a princess and become king someday." Now, is Atalanta correct? Let's see. To her shock, he replied, "No, in order to marry the woman I love. She just happens to be a princess." Then he walked to the starting line where Atalanta thought. While Atalanta thought, "There is something different about this one." Still, she took her place next to him. A moment later, the race was on. Atalanta began to pull ahead almost at once, but Hippomenes drew one of the apples from inside his clothing and tossed it ahead of her and a little off to the side. That moment, Atalanta saw the apple. She had to have it. What do you think will happen? She turned and went after it. As she picked it up, she saw Hippomenes ahead of her, and losing no more time, she took off like a deer. Soon, Hippomenes heard her footsteps closing in behind him. Drawing out apple number 2, he held it up so she would see it and tossed it back over his shoulder. She turned right around and ran back to get it while Hippomenes ran on. Grabbing the second apple, she saw Hippomenes halfway to the finish line. This time, Atalanta took off after him like a speeding cheetah, dashing across the grasslands. Soon, Hippomenes could hear her rapid footsteps getting closer, and he took out apple number 3 and threw it into a nearby field of tall grass. Of course, Atalanta went after it, hunting through the grass for the golden fruit, while Hippomenes kept running. This one, too, she held in the palm of her hand as she returned to the race. In all of Atalanta's life, she had never run as she ran then. Her feet seemed not to touch the ground. Faster and faster she moved, and closer to Hippomenes she came. He told himself, Don't look back, or you might lose a step. Now, she was only 3 steps behind him. Now 2 steps. Now just one. And then she thought to herself, would it be so terrible if I did marry him? And as she thought that, Hippomenes gained a step and crossed the finish line before her. What happened after that? Well, I am glad to say that Atalanta kept her word and married Hippomenes. And I am even gladder to say that she had been right. There was something different about him, and soon she loved him as much as he loved her. Hippomenes never minded that Atalanta could outrun him. He was happy just to be the one running with her. Okay. That's the end of this Greek myth.